hello, and welcome to the Air and Space Live Chat. We are coming to you live from the floor of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, Stephen F. Ludbar Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. I'm Marty Kelsey. I'm one of the hosts of STEM in 30, an Emmy-nominated TV show for students produced by the museum. Today is part of the Soar Together Family Day, UFOs, Fact versus Fiction, and we have a great program for you today, and we want this to be your show. If you're joining us online, head down to the comments section and let us know what questions you have and where you're watching from. And if you're in our audience today, thanks for coming out to the museum. There are QR codes on either side of the stage. Give that a scan, submit your question and where you're from. We'll get to as many questions today as we possibly can, and we'll be giving shout outs. Like I said, today we're talking about UFOs. 75 years ago this month, at the in Roswell, New Mexico, there was a weather balloon crash at the that was initially reported as a recovered flying disc by the Roswell Army Airfield. The crash has been the focus of Project Blue Book, science fiction, and many conspiracy theories. Today we're going to talk about some aircraft that have been mistaken for UFOs and why unidentified aerial phenomenon, or what the military calls UFOs, are actually a really big deal. Before we do, let's learn a bit more about the weather balloons and the crash in Roswell 75 years ago in a quick video produced by STEM in 30. Check it out.
A large area of bright wreckage made up of rubber strips, tinfoil, and rather tough paper and sticks. These were the words that rancher W.W. Mac Brazel used to describe the debris found on his property on June 14, 1947. This bit of stuff set off a chain reaction triggering an investigation by Roswell Army Airfield's 509th Composite Group, and on July 8th, the Roswell Daily Record ran the headline, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in the Roswell region. But was it really a flying saucer? It was not. What was found at the ranch that day in 1947 were pieces of a large high-altitude balloon the U.S. Air Force equipped with microphones to listen for nuclear bomb tests in the Soviet Union, a prospect that was far more frightening than a UFO at that time. Studying the upper atmosphere has been around for a long time. In the 1800s, kite observation stations were established by the United States Weather Bureau, today's National Weather Service, for taking observations. Using kites had some disadvantages, mainly that you can't fly kites as high as balloons. Higher flights allow for much better weather readings. NOAA has been using weather balloons for a long time too, and still does today.
What kind of balloons do you like? Hot air? Weather? Party?
All right, well, today we are joined by Colonel Buzz Carpenter, who flew the SR-71 Blackbird and also used to work at a place called Groom Lake. You may know that better as Area 51. Please welcome Buzz Carpenter. Buzz, first of all, isn't it awesome to be back in person and having an audience here?
This is wonderful to be post-pandemic, to have all of you out, to personally come and visit the Ludbar Hazy Center, and that Marty and I and the other docents and curators that support the museum can, in fact, hopefully answer your questions.
And so that's what today's program is about. Let us know what questions you have down in the comments section on YouTube or Facebook, and scan this QR code here in the audience to submit those questions. Buzz, let's get started. Tell us a little bit about your work at Area 51.
Area 51 was established in 1955 when we were developing the U-2 in pretty high secrecy, and they're trying to find a place where they could test it. And one of the things out west, there are lots of dry lakes. And if I took you out there and you walked on it, you would think they were concrete. It gives test pilots and test airplanes, if they have an emergency and can't get back to their airfield, they can make a landing on one of these dry lakes, which has happened many times. Well, Groom Lake was selected because it sits right in the middle of the former nuclear test area, so it's very isolated, and it was a perfect place for us to develop the U-2, the predecessor to the SR-71, to the 117 you see here, and it's active today. There are many projects that we are working on, and they get to different levels. The best place to test them But when you get to like an airplane like the B-2 was so big, even though it was stealthy and very advanced technology, it was basically done at Edwards Air Force Base.
All right, well, we've got a bunch of folks tuning in online. We've got the Philippines, Botswana, the Netherlands, Southern California, Greece, and Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, I got to say to the people in the audience here, the online folks are really cleaning up on this. I don't have any shout outs from the audience here, so get on that QR code. Let us know your questions and where you're from. All right, let's see. I've got all kinds of questions coming in. Buzz, tell us a little bit about your experience flying the SR-71, and that was sometimes seen as a UFO.
It was, because early in the program, it was very classified. Every now and then, somebody would get just a passing view of it and wonder, what is this thing? Is it something from space? Is it something? And depending the circumstance, sometimes like in an airplane, they were asked to land, and then they were then asked to sign documents that they didn't see anything. A dear friend of mine who teaches at University of Virginia right now, Dr. Gerald Haynes, he used to be the historian for the National Reconnaissance Office. His PhD was on UFOs. He had complete access because of his clearances from Roswell up to about 1982. From the data that he had, which we felt was quite complete, about 65% of the UFOs were actually secret military experiments that somehow somebody had seen part of it. 35% were inconclusive. Was it a weather phenomena? Was it a misidentification by the observer? Who knows? So you can see there's a fair number that are still in the unknown category.
And there was a report released last year by the Pentagon about unidentified aerial phenomenon. There were real recent hearings in Congress about this. Buzz, can you talk a little bit about why it's such a big deal that we either know what they are or don't know what they are?
You figure one of the number one jobs of the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army is to protect this country we love. And when you have phenomena that came up, in this case on Navy radar, that we can't explain, your first question is, has somebody out there developed some kind of a new cloaking that would be able to come in, enter our airspace, or do things in our country without being detected? So that's part of the reason that this becomes a high priority, to try to determine what's this phenomena that we can't explain.
And if you've ever seen a B-2 fly over a football game, imagine, or a baseball game, imagine what that would have been like. When was the B-2 developed?
I worked on the B-2. It was in development in 1983, because I was in charge of the funding. So it's been around for quite a while.
So we've got a video playing here of a B-2 flying over a baseball game. And can you imagine seeing that in the early 80s, not knowing what it was before that became public? I think that would be incredibly scary and probably led to a lot of those reports. We've got a question here from Blaine in Illinois. Is the UFO phenomenon a primarily American one? The idea of spotting top secret Cold War aircraft seems like a uniquely American experience. If not, how seriously are other nations taking UFO reports?
It is not a unique American concern or detection of phenomena. You have European countries that have also had detections, and I can't speak for Russia in its days as the Soviet Union, but I would well imagine that they had incidents where pilots came back and couldn't explain what they had seen that day, and it may or may not have driven an area of concern. I know the British have looked at it almost as closely as we have for the concerns about the defense of their island.
And just this week, NASA came out and said they're developing a commission to look at unidentified aerial phenomenon. And I don't know if anybody saw this on the news. I thought it was really awesome. There was a zoo in Amarillo that spotted something they didn't know on a security camera, and they are calling it a UAO, an unidentified Amarillo object, because it was Amarillo, Texas, where they saw it. So check that out on the news. It's a pretty interesting story. So we've got Grand Rapids, Michigan, Dublin, Ireland, and Oklahoma tuning in. Again, we've got some time left in the program. Let us know what your questions are, either in the comments section or through the QR code. Buzz, tell us the different aircraft that you worked on that might have been mistaken as UFOs.
Well, I was blessed in my Air Force career, and with the SR-71, I had some pretty high clearances, so it allowed me to come into programs. The 117, the SR-71 was the first stealthy creation, and that was President Eisenhower's #1 concern. He wanted an airplane, and this is before Gary Powers was shot down. He said, I want an airplane Khrushchev can't see, because if we're going to have to continue to overfly Russia to gain information, he could consider it an act of war. So as you're developing stealth, the first stealth that you know today that became a buzzword was the 117. Consider that second generation. Out on the floor here, do take advantage down at the end of the fighter section, you got the F-35, our most modern fighter. It's going to replace the F-16, and it's probably going to replace a lot of the F-22. That is upper stealth. Very hard to see that airplane on radar, and so that's the coverage that it's gone to. I worked on the F-22, which was our first stealthy fighter, and you see the 117. There's also work that's being done in a different kind of stealthiness. How do you hide a satellite in orbit? And that's a much more difficult, because satellites don't move. And they mean they're in orbit, but once you figure out what the orbit is, you can predict for the next 100 years exactly where it is. So once you've detected it, it's really hard to do things at that point so that people can't observe it.
Buzz, you mentioned stealth, and what can the folks here in the museum and the people that are watching online can go and find all kinds of images? What can they look for when they go back and look at the SR-71 that maybe compares to the F-117 and is part of that stealthy profile?
Well, you're probably going to look at the SR-71 and say, did they have a manufacturing problem? Because the tail isn't up. That was purposeful. The tail slopes in, so as radar energy hits it, it doesn't bounce back to the site that's looking for. So that's a purposeful piece that went into the design of the airplane. If I took the black paint off the airplane, all the edges are a special material that absorbs the radar energy. And even the paint is special because it has small amounts of ferrite, iron particulate matter in, so as the radar energy hits the paint, it slightly diffuses before it reflects. So these are all different techniques. On modern fighters, the inlets are designed in such a way like the wings on the SR was, so as radar energy hits it and goes in, it can't come out. So there's no return off it.
So when we're talking about stealth and we're talking about the sensors, and the Blackbird was a platform to look at other countries, when we're talking about UFOs, we're not just talking about physical sightings, we're talking about those sensor readings as well, right?
That's right, because many of the recent, quote, UFOs they're trying to identify come from Navy radar, and they're trying to figure out what is the phenomena that would have caused something like that to be generated. And I would say the greater concern is the phenomena seems to be similar. So they're trying to figure out what is happening out there that is causing this phenomenon. Is it something I need to be concerned about, like Marty said, or is it something we didn't understand about the radar? Under circumstances, you're gonna, I'll give you an example. When I was flying the SR-71, we came up with an advanced synthetic aperture radar. Now, I know that's probably gonna be kind of mind-boggling, but it was a mapping radar. So when we started flying it, all of a sudden we found things we hadn't expected. If we were flying and trying to find an aircraft hangar somewhere, if the hangar was empty, the radar energy came out one way. If there was an airplane or something in there, the radar energy came out another way. We used to do inventories of the Soviet subpens in Murmansk. We never overflew Russia, but we could tell who was home because it depended on the way the radar energy came out. It was something that the planners and the builders had never expected. It was just operations told us. So we weren't, after we knew what it was, we weren't surprised by it. We were actually delighted that we were learning more than we thought we would.
Ruth online asks, before I was born, my dad was stationed at Area 51. How secretive is it? And did you have any precautions you had to deal with?
Yes, I had to go through a special clearance for operating. Before I was working I used to fund Area 51, so I would go out there and work with them what they needed. It's very limited. You have to have a reason for being out there. If I were taking some of you out there, I would fly you into Las Vegas. You had a specific reason for being there. We would meet at McCarran on the far side. There are 737s that have a red stripe along the side. We call them Janet airplanes. I would put you on board and escort you. The shade would be down where you're sitting. We would fly out to Area 51. We would land. There'd be a car waiting for us. We would take you to where your business was for the day, and only where your business was for the day. Rarely did I ever have anybody spend the night. I would put you back on another Janet airplane, the red stripe, and take you back to probably McCarran, but your destination might be somewhere in Southern California. So the security was really tight.
That's an awesome question and an awesome answer. Remember, we've got time for more questions. Submit them in the comments section on YouTube and Facebook, and scan the QR code here in the audience to send us your questions. Buzz, when you were flying, was there a process for reporting something that you didn't know?
The sensors on the SR, we had the radar, we had the optical, we also had the electronic. And the electronic was fairly broadband, looking for new frequencies from radar, new communications that some country would be using, Soviet Union, Red China, North Korea, or whatever. And then it would be up to the analysts to go in and try to figure out what had we seen. And one of the advantages of the SR over other platforms is a normal airplane flies at about 7 miles a minute. We were flying at 35 miles a minute. So if that signal was only up for, let's say, 30 seconds, an airplane, let's say flying 100 miles away, would have a very narrow angle to try to figure out where that location was. We have 17 miles. So not only could we find signals that were of interest, but we could also pretty much pinpoint where the signal had come from, which really helped with our overall understanding of what a potential adversary was doing.
Awesome. Well, we've got folks from Bangladesh, Northern Virginia, Leeds in the UK, and Argentina, as well as Liberty, Missouri tuning in. Hi, Mom. And thank you all so much for tuning in. And their next question comes from the audience, Buzz. And they want to know, how are the UFO reports reviewed and what agencies are involved in that?
There was an agency that was established after the Roswell that went on for years and years. So if there was something that you formally reported because you thought it was enough unusual phenomena that somebody should look at it, there was a group in the Pentagon that's their job was to look through not only U.S. incidents, but they will also get a cross flow at sometimes from another country on something that we're trying together to figure out, was this kind of a new phenomena? Was it a one-time event? Was it a misidentification?
And that's one of the things that if you go read the UFO report from the Pentagon, which I did this week, it's really interesting to see that part of what they're working on is those systems for pilots to be able to report things that they don't know and to kind of lose that stigma of, oh, you saw a UFO, okay. And so they've started categorizing in the 5 different areas. And so I encourage you to go read that report. It's kind of an interesting read if you get a chance to. Now, Buzz, I'm pretty sure I know what the answer to this next question is, but somebody wants to know what your favorite aircraft that you flew is.
The one that changed my life is that black airplane out on the floor that I have 67 hours in. The SR-71, there's only 85 of us ever flew it. Kelly Johnson up in heaven has got to be absolutely delighted. It was his greatest creation. I love to see the young men and women here because they walk in, they can't tell if it's an airplane or a space plane. And this is something that first flew in 1964, and they were all built in the mid-60s. A UFO, to kind of flesh out what Marty, there's another piece of it. We try to cloak our airplanes. We've talked about radar, but you know there's an importance of visual. So sometimes you flew an airplane unannounced in areas to see would it be reported? Did people see it from the ground? And try different types of camouflage, different types of color configurations to try to give the vehicle a visual protection along with a radar protection.
And if you look at some of the old World War I airplanes here at the museum, particularly underneath, you see different patterns that they were using back then, which is really interesting to see the progression of World War I to the more modern military aircraft and how we worked on camouflaging them. Buzz, just because I think it's incredibly cool, tell us about the performance of the SR-71, because it's staggering.
Imagine, one, you have to wear a spacesuit. I wore Gemini suits for about 3 years, and then the advanced suit you see in the case, the same suit that the shuttle astronauts used on the first 4 shuttle missions, because they hadn't designed their spacesuits yet. So they borrowed our spacesuit. You can see the relationship between the programs. So you're flying in a spacesuit because you're going to be at 85,000 feet. Your greatest sense of speed is on takeoff. You're cleared for takeoff, you light the 2 powerful afterburners, and in 20 seconds you're going to go 4,500 feet. You lift off doing 240 miles an hour. You'll pass through 20,000 feet in less than 2 minutes from the time that you release the brakes. If you go all the way to altitude, it'll take you 17 more minutes. You say, well, that's a lot of time. Well, when you're at 20,000 feet, you're doing 400 miles an hour. You're going to climb 60,000 feet, and you're going to level off doing 2,150 miles an hour. It's the only airplane in the world that can climb and accelerate at the same time. People ask me, what's your sense? When you're at 85,000 feet, there's nothing else around you. You're 3 times the speed of sound. All the sound is behind you. So you don't have a sense of speed, because when you're looking down 16 or 17 miles below you, yeah, the earth is moving, but it's like when you drove here today and you're coming along the freeway, and that sign when you're about to turn off and you're doing 65 miles an hour is kind of coming at you. But that farmhouse 3 miles to the side is kind of just moving along. So when you're at that altitude and you see the curvature of the earth, you can see 350 miles in any direction. And probably one of the most magnificent things, I wish I could take you all up, at night, the sky is absolutely a twinkle, because 90% of the stars up there we can't see down here because they're so faint, the atmosphere filters them out, which tells you that's exactly why we have the Hubble Space Telescope. It has to be out of the atmosphere to be able to see all those magnificent little constellations and galaxies that are out there.
I love that connection, and when we're done with this program today, those of you here in the audience, as you're heading out away from the space shuttle, on the right-hand side of the kind of the hallway between the shuttle and the Blackbird, you'll see a full-scale model of the James Webb Space Telescope mirror. It's amazing how large it is, and there's a video there that you can watch. You can also go check out STEM in 30. We have a show all about the James Webb Space Telescope to learn what it's looking for and how it's doing it. Really interesting stuff, and I love the connection to the Blackbird. Now, Buzz, how did you heat up your lunch when you were flying?
It just so happens I have some with me. So if I was flying more than 4.5 hours, we have what's called tube food. It's what astronauts have. On your helmet, there's a hole over here because you're always drinking water, because when you're breathing 100% oxygen, it's dehydrating. You're in a rubber suit, even though the rubber's not touching you. So it's kind of like those of you that ever been to the gym to try to lose a pound or two, you're going to perspire. That's why you wear long johns. So you screw this thing in there, and then you squeeze it. Now, what Marty says was heating it up. Since my window was 560 degrees because of the frictional heating on the airplane, I could hold my tube of food up here. But as one pilot forgot, you better make sure you break the seal before you start the heating, because one ended up with the seal breaking while he was heating it, and he put sloppy joes all over the front of his cockpit. We had a rather rudimentary diet back then. It was sloppy joes, beef and gravy, butterscotch pudding, vanilla pudding, applesauce, and peaches. I took my grandkids recently for a suiting up. They were going up for 9 hours. They were having dinner. He was having chicken cacciatore. I can't remember what the other one, but the thing that really bummed me out, he was having key lime pie as a dessert.
Talk about an unidentified flying object. That's wild stuff right there. Somebody wants to know if we are hiring to search for UFOs and UAPs. You got any openings in the Docent Corps that can help with that, Buzz?
There's always a fascination, and there's a lot of volunteer groups out there, and you've got the name of it I can't remember right now, that's been around for years, looking for what looks like intelligent signals from space, which is, you know, on the spectrum of something that's unidentified. What's causing it? Particularly, I think it was about 3 years ago, from one of the star clusters, there started a rhythmatic emission, and they were really wondering, was this a natural phenomenon of like a pulsar or something, or was this actually some kind of a intelligent life out there trying to communicate? You know, who knows? It came from a very distant galaxy per se.
And it's incredible at the Very Large Array in New Mexico. We were doing some filming there, and we were supposed to be right next to these giant telescopes. They said, we can't film over there. Your equipment will mess it up right now. We just got a fast radio burst, and we have to look at it because we don't know what it is. And I thought that was incredibly interesting that we had to move back so that we didn't mess up their signals. Buzz, talk to us a little bit about, you know, how many UFO sightings are military versus what we're not sure of, and again, reiterate why we care.
You know, that'd be a hard thing to, I don't have a good data, but think about the world we live in now. In the 50s and the 60s and in the 70s, even up until the early 80s, when I came in the Pentagon, it was Department of Defense Research and Development that was reaching out to a lot of this areas. Well, what's the phenomena that's happened with us that's a direct spin-off from the Apollo program that most people don't appreciate? You know, the cell phones we're carrying today and smartphones are a lot to do with our space program. Well, look at these people out there now, and I mean it very positively. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, you know, Steve Jobs, all these people that are basically creating things. Musk and Bezos are having a contest to see who can build the biggest rocket and be the first one to send shuttles. So I think you're increasingly going to see pieces that are driven by the commercial side that we need to keep track of. And particularly when the military goes out today to buy something, it's often a byproduct of some commercial product, particularly in the electronics area. In the electronics area, it's the commercial world that's leading the whole thing.
Buzz, thank you so much for talking with us today. We're out of time for today. Let's give Buzz a big round of applause. Before we leave you today, I want to share a couple of things with you. We just wrapped up the latest season of STEM in 30. Each 30-minute episode covers a different topic, and over the last 9 months, we have touched on a lot of different topics. We dive into astronomy, where we look at the astronomy that you can do at home. We have an episode all about Amelia Earhart that looks at her life, her disappearance, and her legacy. We even have an episode on The Wizard of Oz where we break down the science and flight in the classic movie, and you would be amazed at how many things fly in The Wizard of Oz. Also be watching for our first episode next season, which comes out in September and is very appropriate for today's topic. We're going to look at the Drake equation, which is an equation developed in the 60s to look for and to predict the possibilities of extraterrestrial communicative civilizations. And if you enjoyed today's program, be sure to follow STEM in 30 on Facebook and on Twitter. And as always, we love to hear your feedback. If you liked the program today, if you didn't like the program today, send us an email. We would love to see that. For everybody that showed up today in the audience, we appreciate it. Everybody that was on our online audience, thank you so much. Thanks for watching.
In about 10 minutes, I'll be beside the SR-71, and I'll be more than glad to answer your questions. The happiness, I can tell you, is almost everything about the airplane now is declassified.
Awesome.
Thanks, Marty.
Great
I'll
show.
walk back so we get the microphone.
That sounds
That
good.
was fun.
That was a lot.